Welcome everyone, I'm Michelle Ng from the Dance Art Directive, a student-led group that creates workshops, exhibitions, and community art projects like the Daniels Mural Project, Bay Magada with Elder Wabagoon, artist Q Rock, and the U of T Daniels faculty. To begin, we would like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates, where here and now our bodies meet the earth, where the air, light, and water sustain us, and where we live with many other humans, creatures, plants, and spirits as caretakers and custodians of the land. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Petun, the Neutral, the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. We urge you to learn the true Indigenous history of the land that you currently call home, and to reflect on how to take care of the land and the surrounding communities together. We'd like to welcome Elder Wabagoon, whose incredible heart and dedication inspires us every day. Elder Wabagoon is an Ojibwe elder who sits with the Loon Clan, a keeper of the sacred pipes, a member of the Lac Seul First Nation, and a 60 Scoop survivor. Wabagoon is a speaker, land defender, and water protector. She is the first People's Leadership Advisor to the Dean at the Daniels faculty. Recently, she initiated, led, and supported a team to curate the award-winning mural Bay Magada with artist Q Rock at One Spadina Crescent. In the summer months, Elder Wabagoon continues to share teachings with Indigenous youth in a summer program, Nikabi Dawadina Gegwag, a U of T access program she co-founded 4 years ago. Thank you.
Oh, that was fast. All of a sudden I heard my name. Okay. Hanin in the way Magana dog. Bonjour, Wabagoon Indigenous, Obishakokang, Lac Seul First Nation, Minwa, Toronto, and Dunchaba. Mangdodo. What I said was a traditional Ojibwe protocol greeting, and I said, hello, all my relations, and welcome. My name is Elder Wabagoon, flower blooming in spring. I come from Obishakokang, the narrow is abundant with white pine, Lac Seul First Nation, and I sit with the Loon Clan. My biological mother, an Indian residential school survivor, Edith Vincent Nisape. My grandmother, Annie Sape Ni Pedawewe, medicine woman, wife of my grandfather, Alex Sape, birch bark canoe builder. These are my ancestors. As I welcome our esteemed guests and moderator, James Bird, I offer these words as the First People's Leadership Advisor to the Dean. Truth and reconciliation is a path we walk together. In January of 2017, U of T's president and provost accepted the final report titled Answering the Call with Chia Toan from the steering committee for the University of Toronto response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. This was built with community. Nothing about us without us. There are 34 calls to action contained within this document. It can be seen overwhelming to tackle the largest systematic issues. First, we need to learn and understand about the calls to action, come together as one, and enact one action at a time. Shannon Simpson will speak to how these are being addressed centrally. I can speak about how we're achieving them here at Daniels faculty. My appointment addresses call to action number 11, the creation of an Indigenous leadership position within the Dean's office. Upon my arrival, I was inspired by our Daniels students and their murals support Black designers to use our north facade as a canvas to respond specifically to call to action number 2, a strategy for the funding and placement of more Indigenous public art across all 3 campuses in close consultation with local Indigenous communities. You will hear and see about this project later with a presentation by Q Rock. Susan Blight will speak to how public art at other campuses have impacted and addressed the calls to action. Since 2018, I have co-led with Liat Margolis, Nikipi Dawadina Gigwag, an access program for Indigenous youth here at Daniels. Nikipi Dawadina Gigwag is a culturally grounded, land-based mentorship program and pathway to post-secondary education that responds to call to action number 26. The university should invest more in publicizing existing college pathway programs and in actively recruiting into those programs and into the existing targeted Indigenous access and bridging programs. Matthew Hickey, an Indigenous architect joining the stage later tonight, has inspired many of these youth. As we continue to walk this path together, we hope to address ever more of the 34 calls to action. Thank you very much for listening. I now welcome Pat Tobin to the stage. Miigwech.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Elder Wabagoon, for the kind introduction and those important remarks. My name is Pat Tobin. I'm the Director of Arts and Culture Services for the City of Toronto. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the city to this great keynote event, panel event that'll kick off Doors Open 2022. Doors Open after a 2-year hiatus is very, very happy to be back and very happy to see you embracing the return to live events in our city. Doors Open is presented through the generosity of our sponsor, Great Gulf, who I'd like to recognize. Their outstanding community spirit and continued support for this great event has enabled us to bring it back without delay. I'd also like to thank our other sponsors, Schlegg Canada and Carpenters and Allied Workers Union Local 27, for their ongoing support of Doors Open Toronto. The city, for its media partners, is very proud to have both the Toronto Star and Zoomer Media as partners. And particularly, I want to thank our hosts here today, the John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design, who in addition to hosting tonight's kickoff event, will have their doors open for the full weekend of Doors Open to invite the public in to see this incredible facility and moreover the works of the many students here. In addition to co-producing tonight's keynote, the faculty has also, as you've seen upon walking in and through the topic of today's keynote, put an emphasis on Indigenous design and Indigenous placemaking. And I think for Doors Open, which is ultimately about place and land and certainly built form and within that Toronto's colonial history as expressed through buildings, there is no better way than to talk about the indigeneity of land, about who owns land, and about what Indigenous design looks like in the context of a contemporary Toronto. So this panel could be not better constructed to kick off Doors Open, I'd say. I should leave you with just a couple other notes. In addition to the 102 in-person sites scattered around the city, there are 20 virtual experiences. There's a great series of self-guided and guided tours that you can find on the city's website for Doors Open. There's a talks series in addition to this, films on demand that can be screened off the website, as well as some centerpieces this year at Nathan Phillips Square and Toronto City Hall with programming for children and adults alike. Doors does offer us an incredible opportunity to reconnect with our city, very important now as we reemerge. And I think it has led to a generation of Toronto urbanists who take the city very seriously and carry it with great care. So for those of us who work at the city on major events, Doors is our sweetheart event because we think it serves a uniquely municipal function and a really important citizen engagement function. So thank you for taking part in that. I want to thank that team, the City Cultural Events team, led by Nathaniel Kennedy and Jean Holmes, for pulling this event together, as well as the hundreds of volunteers that we rely on every year to ensure that the public has safe use of the 102 sites. With that, I would like to turn over the podium to a great champion for civic issues in the city, Madeline Zito, who is Vice President of Public Relations for Great Gulf. Madeline.
Took me quite a while to get here today. I wasn't sure if there was going to be a big thunderstorm, that it would be an exciting welcome. I come from Vaughan, so it's a bit of a trek, especially on a Friday afternoon with the craziness in traffic. I guess everybody's back out. Anyway, thank you all for being here. And a very special thank you to Elder Wabagoon for your welcome, to Pat Tobin that we just heard from the City of Toronto, Arts and Culture Services, and of course to the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design for partnering with the city in producing this keynote talk. I just want you to know that standing here on this very special campus, which is really nostalgic for me, I want to say how proud I am to be a U of T alumni, along with my late husband, Paul, my daughter, Simona, and members of our family. There's so many beautiful and unique experiences from my time on this campus have really shaped my life in an amazing way. As Pat has mentioned, Great Gulf has been a longtime supporter. I believe it's around 10 years that we've been sponsoring Doors Open. And with the City of Toronto, we share the vision of contributing to a vibrant and diverse world-class city. And I know we hear that a lot, but if you travel and you see what other places are like, you know that this is really an amazing city, and we're very lucky to be here. And of course, we're very delighted to return as presenting sponsors of this magnificent initiative of the City of Toronto, Doors Open Toronto. Great Gulf is also very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And we work with Indigenous organizations, and we're very proud of that. Particularly, we have a new development coming up, our latest project, which is Quayside on the Toronto waterfront. We believe that with great success comes the responsibility to support the communities we serve. We applaud the City of Toronto for its commitment to create events such as this for the benefit of all citizens, and wish to continue to strengthen these bonds by supporting cultural sponsorships like this one. As one of Toronto's premier events, it showcases the city's rich history, inspired architecture, and enlightened design. I would like to invite all of you to explore all the wonderful events that the city will offer through Doors Open Toronto. I think Pat has named them, so I'm not going to repeat them. And we hope that you will be able to join us for Doors Open and experience this remarkable event. Thank you once again for this great honor. And now it's my pleasure to welcome, on behalf of Daniels Faculty of Architecture and this evening's moderator, James Bird.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Miigwech, Uzu, Mosicho. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Elder Wabagoon, for your continuous guidance. And it's good to see our panelists, Q Rock, Susan Blight, Shannon Simpson, and Matt Hickey. It's a pleasure to be here in the School of Architecture, talking about Indigenous design and issues that are so relevant to our world today. So bonjour and welcome to Open Insights keynote talk for the Doors Open Toronto 2022, Truth and Reconciliation, Indigenous Perspectives on the Role of Art and Architecture on the University Campuses. My name is James Bird, and I'm a proud member of the Denisovan Nation affiliated with the Northwest Territories Métis Nation. I'm a PhD student here at the Daniel School of Architecture, and my specialty, I'm going to look at how language informs shapes using an algorithm. I want to thank our collaborators, Doors Open Toronto, the City of Toronto, Great Gulf. A special thanks to our founder, Postsecondary Education Fund for Aboriginal Learners. So tonight we gather Indigenous knowledge keepers, architects, artists from across Turtle Island to share their artistic work and involvement in creative projects on university campuses. Universities are now reimagining their role in the collective education and knowledge, as well in sharing narratives of indigeneity, settler colonialism, and Canadian identity. Our presenters will share their work and their perspectives on the role of art and architecture in truth and reconciliation. Thank you to our audience for joining us today, both here in the main hall, and I must say it's really nice to be back doing these events live. We waited our time to do this. Here in the main hall, and they're on Zoom, as well as watching directly on YouTube tonight, which is wonderful. Tonight, we will have each panelist introduce one at a time. They will be introduced, and they will begin with a short presentation about their work. Then we will gather on stage for a conversation and end with audience questions. Our first presenter tonight is Susan Blight, somebody I've known for quite a while and have come to really appreciate what she is. She has taught me a lot in the years I've known her. She's an Anishinaabe interdisciplinary artist from Cochiquin First Nations. Susan works with public art, creates a specific intervention, and is a photographer, filmmaker, social practitioner. Her solo and collaborative work engages questions of personal and cultural identity and its relationship to space. She is currently a PhD candidate in social justice education at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education here at the U of T, and her dissertation looks at the visual and spatial formations of Anishinaabe geographies of resilience. Very interesting. Susan is the Delane Chair in Indigenous Visual Culture at OCAD University and an assistant professor in the Faculty of Arts and Science. Please welcome Susan Blight.
Ani bonjour, Mikanaknan Dorem, Nananegune Viknindigo, Susan Blight and Indigenous, Shaganashi Wanakazoyan, Kuching and Donchipat, Minoa, Toronto and Digitan Ungum. So, hello, my English name is Susan Blight. I'm Snapping Turtle Clan, Anishinaabe, citizen of the Anishinaabe Nation of Treaty Number 3. I'm a band member at Kuchiching First Nation. That's where my mom comes from, as well as my maternal grandfather. My maternal grandmother comes from Nakachawanan, also in Treaty 3. And my father's mother comes from Miskosimini-Zebing, which in English is Big Grassy First Nation. So I'd first like to start by thanking Elder Wabagoon. Feel very at home today because you're here come from the same place, the same land, and just to really appreciate you starting us off in such a good way. And it's just good to meet you in person. Also to James, thank you, James, wherever you are, James, for the kind words and your moderation today. Thank you to the team, Nini, all of the team here at Daniels that put this together, as well as the City of Toronto. And I want to thank the folks who are working on the video and the audio, making this event happen, as well as the folks who clean this space. That's important to acknowledge because we're given this beautiful space to talk about things that are substantial, things that are about change and a better future. And the folks who clean this space are contributing to that discussion as well. And also thank you to my fellow panelists. Q Rock, good to meet you in person finally. Shannon, nice to see you again. And Matthew, always good to see you too. We're colleagues at OCAD University. I'm really happy to be here tonight. I actually have worked at the U of T. I worked at the U of T for close to 10 years, just across the street over at First Nations House. It's where I met James and Shannon. So this feels really special tonight to return to this space so close to the First Nations House. That was such a locus of community for me. I wanted to start by just showing you this image. This is the bay called Minashkiziwaning. In English, it's called Haymarsh Bay on Couchiching First Nation. This is the land that my mom currently lives on. It's also the land that my great-grandparents raised my grandfather on. And so it goes back in my family for, many generations, and it's still a place that I return to. I start my talks with this because it's important to me that you understand where I come from, but also that you see the beauty of the land that I come from, because this is why I do the work that I do. I don't know how to forward this slide. Do I just... okay. So I just thought I'd start. I was asked to come and talk about some of the work that I've done in other university campuses to really bring Anishinaabeg language specifically, but also the philosophies and epistemologies that are contained within our language to public space. But I thought, just in case you don't know sort of the work or the background that I've done, I'd start with the Ogima Mikina Collective, which I guess is sort of the work that I'm most well known for at this point in my career. So this collective, Ogima Mikina, is a collective that I co-founded with Hayden King in December of 2012. It was around the time where the Idle No More movement was a very visible presence in public space. I think that was a really important time and a formative time for me personally, because of the ways in which public space was utilized for Indigenous resistance. So at that time, it was really, really visible in the news. And what was so powerful about that time was that activists, Indigenous activists, were really taking over public space for these shows of Indigenous sovereignty and collectivity. So they were taking over shopping malls and street corners for round dances and really utilizing public space for Indigenous resistance, but more so these moments of collective joy. And so that got me thinking about public space and the way that we can claim public space as Indigenous peoples. It is our right to do so as peoples of this land. So we wanted to think through sort of creatively organizing, using art, visual art specifically, public art specifically, to really address these notions or these ideas that were on our mind as both activists and artists. So the collective itself is really primarily concerned with that central question of how we might bring together art and activism in a way that does not become prescriptive or didactic, but instead opens up questions and dialogues. So the project itself is a collective that works primarily in public art, intervention, and social practice. We're really concerned with how we bring together language, art, and activism, and how all of those things sort of relate to a kind of, or contribute to, maybe relate to and contribute to an Anishinaabe cultural resurgence. And in fact, even more specifically, I guess, Anishinaabe aesthetics and cultural production. And how really tapping into those aesthetics, those Anishinaabe aesthetics, both contributes to carrying ways from the past into the future, but also envisions a new way of looking at space going forward into the future. We also sort of consider this collective part of a broader project of justice and liberation and decolonization. And we like to sort of think through our work as always in dialogue with other social movements and other theories of change. I don't know how to get to the next slide. Thank you. It's just happening magically. It's happening magically. It's great. Thank you, whoever's doing that. So this is a work that we did at Queen's University in 2018. The impetus for this work, or really the inspiration for this work, came from a very traditional Native source. It came from Facebook, just kidding. On Facebook in 2017, an elder who's extremely important to me, somebody I've learned a lot from, somebody who's part of my lodge family. Her name is, in English, is Sherry Kopanase, and in Anishinaabe, she's known as Nijuzake. She's Anishinaabe from Enigaming in Treaty Number 3. But on Facebook in 2017, Sherry wrote, and I'm going to quote this because I don't want to get it wrong, quote, "As Anishinaabe, we have been given our way of life to solve and get through any situation. Anishinaabe is not ever stuck," unquote. So I took this Facebook post as something that was, rare to find on Facebook, but extremely profound and philosophical. And our contributions to this show, curated by Dylan Robinson and Candace Hopkins, called Soundings, was this mural you see here on the campus of Queen's University, directly across from the Agnes Etherington Arts Center. And this post by Sherry Kopanase Nijuzaki was really the inspiration for this work. It's the conceptual basis for the text that you see here, which translates in English to "We are never stuck." These really profoundly philosophical words and ideas really from Nijuzaki articulate a concept or a theory of Anishinaabeg resistance and adaptation. What Sherry is offering us is a kind of confidence, a kind of faith, I guess you could say, in our own language, in our own ways of knowing and being. Our specific, culturally specific epistemologies. And the faith is that those things have sustained us in the past, have taught us how to adapt, have taught us how to be resilient, and that we can take those ways and get through any situation going forward into the future. So building on this message that she offered us on Facebook, Ogima Mikana proposed a mural on the facade of the Macintosh Corey building at Queen's University. This is a heat transfer vinyl that is applied as a graphic representation of the story of the return of the sturgeon. We wanted to think through this idea of the sturgeon as a symbol, first of all, not a symbol, as a real being, a being in this world that has agency, but also a being that the Anishinaabe have a very long relationship to. And specifically, the people that I come from in Treaty 3 have a very specific relationship to the sturgeon. The sturgeon is a being that we have been in relation to for thousands of years. And in fact, the earliest European settlers who came to the land that I'm from wrote of us as quote unquote sturgeon Indians and called our land sturgeon country. So even to them, it was very apparent that we had this very special and specific relationship to the sturgeon. And so this, I'm going to go to the next slide. Thank you. I don't know if it changed. Thank you. So this invocation of the sturgeon that you see on the mural itself compounds the message given by Sherry Kopanase of restoration and return. So known in our language as Name, the sturgeon is a fish that we feel holds ancient knowledge. This is a fish and a non-human being that is connected to the stars, to the galaxy that we live in, as well as the future. It's a being that carries our ways into the future. The sturgeon nourished Anishinaabe families and communities for generations upon generations upon generations. And even where I'm from, we often held ceremonies at the actual site where we harvested sturgeon. That's how direct the relationship of the sturgeon was to our spiritual health, as well as things like political diplomacy and community building. But of course, like a lot of non-human beings and human beings ourselves, the Name, the sturgeon, has suffered under colonization. So first, this fish was seen as a problem in the sense that it's a big fish oftentimes, and it easily destroyed settler nets who didn't actually know how to make a net to catch a sturgeon. But then after that, after being thrown away and discarded, and there's certain Indigenous scholars like Winona LeDuc, for instance, who's written about this, after seeing the sturgeon as useless or invaluable and literally throwing away the bodies of sturgeons, it then became a valuable resource when settlers discovered that isinglass could be extracted from the swim bladder of the sturgeon. Now, isinglass is something that's used in alcohol production. I think it's wine and beer. It's also used for a number of other things, including an Anishinaabe glue that was very important to our jars and things that we made from the sturgeon. And so the damming as well of various waterways within Anishinaabe territory prevented the sturgeon from their ancestral journeys. And this to us as Anishinaabe represents a profound violence. To stop another being from their own self-determination, from their own ancestral journey, represents a profound violence to us. So this confining and capturing and preventing the sturgeon from traveling in their ancestral waterways is something that we were thinking through, Hayden and I, when we made this piece. And one thing that I do want to note about this work, and I'll go to the next slide if possible, is that grammatically, sorry, I have to go one back. Sorry about that. So grammatically in this sentence, as I said, it says we are never stuck. Grammatically in Anishinaabe, the we in this sentence is we exclusive, meaning we're talking about us as Anishinaabe and not necessarily everybody else. And that's important for the viewer to understand that the we in this case is Anishinaabeg as we struggle to break free of the constraints of settler colonialism and the impacts it has made on our ability to transfer our knowledge to the next generation. And considering this, we have consciously chosen, other than this talk, but within the piece itself, we have consciously chosen not to provide an English translation. We've asked viewers to do the work and the labor to find out what this means. As they see it and they pass by on the campus, they notice the pattern of sturgeon on the bottom, the text breaking up that pattern, and then the sturgeon going up and over top, free, finally free to move and supersede the constraints of the building. And so that's sort of the rationale for the sturgeon as a motif. The repetition of the sturgeon and the orderly pattern then breaking up to us is a metaphor for something bigger, something about restoration, something about repatriation and revitalization. And just like those sturgeon who, even though we've dammed the waters, they still manage to make it through, the Anishinaabe are never stuck. I'll go to the next slide. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to go very quickly through this, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I work collectively. Along with the collective I have with Hayden, I'm in another collective, and I also work collaboratively often in my work. And the reason that I do that is I find, first of all, working collectively to be something very rewarding. It's challenging, but in a rewarding way. Once you can get through the challenges, you realize that you've learned something from that person that you've worked so closely with. The other thing is that I think it questions notions of authorship that are rooted in Western and imperial notions of authorship, artistic or academic fame, and auteurship, I guess, if that's a word. And those notions that are ingrained in Western education systems and art systems about authorship are really connected to a worldview that sees knowledge as something that can be owned, right? And those things are sort of antithetical to Anishinaabe ways of knowing. Everything that I know about our culture, our language, our philosophies, all of those things are collectively owned. They're owned by all of us. And so that imperial focus on the individual, this sort of hyper individuality and a kind of a disdain for collectivity that occurs I think working collectively can be a way to sort of circumvent that. It's a way to reject that desire for academic or artistic fame and instead to see yourself as part of something broader. I'll go to the next slide. So this work is actually on this campus. This is in front of Hart House. Q Rock is also in this show. It was curated by Maria Hupfield and Mikanak Miigwans. So there are these tree hoardings, which I've tried to do a little research about. I think it's a very Toronto thing, but I might be wrong. There's a construction site, and they put up the tree hoardings around the trees to protect them. This space was given to 2 Indigenous curators to curate Indigenous artists to do what they wanted to with these spaces. And the resulting work for my piece, my hoarding, is one called 6 kilometers and 8,000 years long. And that is a reference to the length and historical depth of the now buried Tattle Creek that runs underneath Hart House. It runs underneath a lot of the U of T campus through Philosopher's Walk up into Bloor Street. And this refrain, Gawin apache ninunada misin zibi, which means we haven't forgotten the river entirely, is repeated across the surface. I'll go to the next slide. Of the hoarding with stickers. And these stickers are compostable stickers, which was important to me. But the stickers also reference political organizing, political messaging, as well as things that we do to sort of make spaces our own or to make objects our own. So stickers on our laptops, on our skateboards, methods that we use to personalize spaces. But this sentence, we haven't forgotten the river entirely, has a kind of ambivalence to it, but it's also a commitment, I think. And within that ambivalence is a question about how we remember the river and how we connect to it, even though we can't see it. The work is really about thinking through locality and hope and how those two things intersect. It's about histories that have been erased and histories that have yet to happen, and the promise of a better future, I guess. That sounds cliche, but what am I trying to say? A future where we don't have buried rivers that become subterranean sewers, but in fact, we honor waterways as systems of governance and reorient ourselves towards them. And so what I'll leave you with is just that my work is both simultaneously material and metaphor. So my work has to do something that is both those things. So in working collectively on this piece, I asked friends of mine to come and help me sticker. So there were, I think, 2,397 stickers to complete this piece. My friends and I worked in the heat, as well as folks from the project itself worked in the heat to put these stickers up. And so that idea of being both material and metaphoric is real. Each time we put up a sticker, we were making a commitment that Tattle Creek would not be forgotten. I think I'll leave it there, but miigwech bizendawayag, I'm conscious of time. Thank you so much for listening.
Susan, I have to apologize. There was a drawer here that pulls out. I was supposed to do that. So my apologies, please. That is really fascinating. It's incredible how we're in this renaissance, I guess not renaissance, but the resurgence of Indigenous thought, engaging the metaphysical, questioning and asking the metaphysical, that world beyond the veil to come forward. And that's obvious in our worldview. And that's wonderful to hear you actually with QROC's work. I'm always really inspired. Well, thank you very much, Susan. Next, I would like to welcome Matthew Hickey. And I'm going to say his name in Mohawk. I am not Mohawk, but I'm going to certainly try. Kianade Gay, Kiake Gay, which is Mohawk. I think it's Mohawk, right? Okay. Belonging to 6 nations of the Grand River, First Nations, Matthew is a partner at Two Row Architects and an instructor here at the Daniel School of Architecture. Matthew is Matthew's research, and work focuses on the realignment of mainstream ways of thinking on the journey towards Indigenous ways of knowing, being, design, and architecture. His work pushes the concepts of integrated landscape, universal accessibility, food equity, the importance of water, and placekeeping for all species, including humans. I have to say that over the years, I've gotten to know Matthew very well, and he was part of the 2018 winner for the Architecture Venice Biennale. So please welcome Matthew Hickey.
I'm using my own computer. Sorry, we're doing a bit of a tech switch here, so just bear with me 1 second. Ooh. Okay, here we go. I'm honored to be here today. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be with this amazing panel of people to discuss the topics which I think are very important in this day and age. Scano, Sego, Segoli, Songwenko, Matthew Hickey Giaso, Hane Zongwe Giaso. My name is Matthew Hickey. I'm Gayet Negehaga, Mohawk Wolf Clan from Six Nations. I'm also Bill C-31B, which means when my mother married my father, she lost her status, and we got that back in the change of the Indian Act in 1985. I'm an architect, I'm a designer, and I'm also a teacher. And all these things are very important to me and sometimes hard to do all at the same time, but I've been having a great time doing that over the past 16 years now since I've graduated. I also work for an architecture firm called Two Row Architect. And part of our work there is ensuring that we're bringing truth to our conversations. An awareness of the current Canadian context is key for us to have conversations about truth and reconciliation, placekeeping, and Indigenous architecture. To frame our conversations today, I wanted to bring together a series of ideas that we've been talking about for the last 8 years or so. They're slightly disjointed, so bear with me there. But the first thing I wanted to speak about is the realignment of Western ways of building back towards Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And I want to use the next few slides to illustrate that a realignment and ultimately what we're seeing as an architecture that is derived from place and that is respectful of place, in essence, Indigenous architecture. So this is an expanded diagram that we created to discuss this realignment. In the gold circle in the middle is Indigenous architecture. The blue line on the outside is where we're going to begin, but you can see down the right-hand side, there's a series of words beginning with forts, moving all the way down to 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The first four are what we're going to focus on for this talk today. So I'm going to start there. So sometimes it's easier, we get asked all the time, what's Indigenous architecture? And sometimes it's easier to explain what it's not to explain that. So Indigenous architecture is not forts. So now I have 1564 on here as one of the first known forts in North America. And this is a map of all the forts in the Greater Canada area compiled in 1930 by Ernest Van Horst, PhD, for the Department of the Interior of Ottawa. The idea of a fort is to secure the landscape, trapping the grounds, controlling the trade routes to ensure that all the resources are controlled and owned. So this is not Indigenous architecture. And you can see all the little dots in here. It's not that clear, but all the little dots are along waterways. Those are the first places that we had forts here in this place. Moving on to railroads. So this is an image of the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, originally built in 1888. So the railroads provided for the rise of the Grand Hotel. So the idea here is that now we have control over the landscape, we have control over the waterways and the ways of moving throughout the land. We can enjoy it from inside our luxury castle. So this building is intended to dominate the landscape and exist in its own essence apart from it. This is not Indigenous architecture. Moving on to modernism. So this is the Seagram building, built in 1958 by Mies van der Rohe in New York City. This building has no directionality to align with natural ventilation or lighting. All the sides are treated exactly the same way. There's no context. Typically, these are built on a raised podium or removed from the street. And there's hierarchy within this building. You can tell someone's level of pay by how high they are in the building and how close they are to a corner office. So we've seen a movement away from this, but this is not Indigenous architecture. And also, don't get me wrong, I love Mies van der Rohe, but this is not Indigenous architecture. Moving into postmodernism, or what I like to call the import of culture. This is the Mississauga City Hall, designed or built in 1987 by Kirkland Jones. And you can see here there's a clear reference or an import of a foreign architecture, Greek architecture, neoclassical, even the use of civic planning. We can see clearly the agora, the amphitheater, and the colonnade. None of these are common to this place of Canada or North America. Imported architecture. So the complex, to the architect's credit, was also intended to reference the agrarian architecture of Mississauga at that time, with the collection of its buildings being similar in composition and form to a working farm. At the time of its construction in 1907, North Mississauga was mostly farmland, but if you go back further than that, Mississauga was mostly creeks, rivers, and forest. So one of the reasons for this imported visual culture is to establish control. This can be seen historically in forts, but also in economic powers in the case of banks. Visual identity of control, power, and stability. This is the Bank of Montreal's head office, located in Montreal, Quebec. It's the centerpiece of the Bank of Montreal at the time. The building is neoclassical in style. The sculpted pediment of the building was done by Sir John Steele. And you can see clearly the import of this form from the Pantheon. The Vancouver Public Library, built by Moshe Softy in 1995. One could call this civic architecture with the intent to create place through the visual reference to what people considered the birthplace of democracy. But what people don't know is that one of the oldest living democracies is actually here in North America with the Haudenosaunee people. So what does this mean within the Canadian context? What is the Canadian identity? And how is this represented in architecture? For 150 years, we've been importing culture into Canada, buildings based on classical interpretations from across the oceans, from a different time and place. This import has continued into the 21st century and can be seen in contemporary constructions throughout Canada. And I wanted to start with a few of these examples to establish this practice within the Canadian context. This type of assertion or import of typology was not only prominent in banks and civic buildings, but also in institutional buildings, including residential schools. This is the Mohawk Institute, 1831, one of the first residential schools, rebuilt after the fire in 1904, which they considered to be caused by the Indians at the school. There were schools in the Sault Ste. Marie area since 1833. Industrial homes built on the Grand River First Nation in 1871. Much like the Mohawk Institute, this school was also destroyed. But also, this school is still a part of a university campus. Algoma University this is the centerpiece of their campus buildings. In May 28th, 2021, the bodies of 250 children were confirmed buried on the grounds of the former Kamloops Residential School. In 1902, the Industrial School for Indian Boys at Lytton opened. This I'm going to go through a series of images here, and what you're seeing is that they all look the same. They all have the same typology. They all have the same way of being built. And, you know, there's a reason for that. They're trying to show you that they're better. They're trying to show you that they are more powerful. So when we look at these typologies of buildings, when we see these buildings on our institutional campuses, these are things that we have to contend with. We're trying to create place for Indigenous people within these campuses. This last image here is of Eastern Commerce just off the Danforth. This is the school that was gifted to the First Nations School of Toronto. The issues of how these places look is only compounded by how they smell, how they sound, and how they feel the survivors of these institutional buildings. All of these buildings were intended to exude through their design, siting, landscape, and details, ideas about permanence, exclusivity, and power. And that building mindset can be seen in the university buildings all across Canada. And right here at the University of Toronto, King's College, 1827, St. Michael's College, 1852, Trinity College, 1851, all designed to exude qualities of permanence, exclusivity, and power. All things that we would consider to not be Indigenous architecture. This is compounded by ideas about heritage. So this is a big question that we're tackling today. How do we reinsert Indigenous values into campuses that were specifically designed to not hold those same values? And heritage for us is something that we've been talking about, trying to expand this idea of heritage into including historic fabric. So we're not just thinking about buildings, but like Tattle Creek, we're thinking about the things that were here before us. It's really important for us to expand our understanding of heritage and into the built place, beyond the built place, into nature, into our relations. So I've got 5 minutes left, and I'm quickly going to speak to you about 4 of our projects and the things that we've been doing on different campuses here in Ontario. To illustrate what we think Indigenous architecture and design should exude, and those are these ideas about a good process. So not just about the final product, but how we get there, adaptability when necessary for us to be able to change our ways. These buildings should exude Indigenous values. And then lastly, this design should be appropriate to place. We're very lucky to get to work on a lot of great projects. One of the most recent projects that we completed was an installation for the Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson. It's affectionately unnamed and called The Ring. For us, this project was all about the process. The process is as important to us as the outcome. And the process for us should also be project specific, each design based on the current cultural conditions and specific needs of the project. So for us, it's a lot about listening, very much about listening first before we even try and think about anything. And this is very difficult for designers and architects to do, but we put our pens down and listen. We like to play. We also like to take those words that we've heard and make sure that we're feeding back to the people that have given us those words to ensure that they are correct. Now, some people think that the ring just popped up right after the statue was taken down, but it was actually in process for about 1.5 years prior to that removal of the statue of Egerton Ryerson. So the ring was designed to be a land acknowledgement that's universally accessible. So there's no words, there's just imagery and a clear sighting of a form. The ring is perforated with the moon cycles, aligned to the north, opening to the east, and contains the constellation Pleiades, a constellation that's very important to numerous Indigenous groups across North America. And then also the Anishinaabe symbols for the 7 grandparent teachings are inscribed. Love, respect, bravery, truth, honesty, humility, and wisdom. And here you can see the outline of a turtle, which represents one of those. Najiwan Kando Suwingimik is an Indigenous student center that we did at Wilfrid Laurier University. This project was what we've done, again, where we've been gifted a building that was clearly colonial, and in this case, a heritage building as well. So what do we do? And this is where we have to be adaptable a little bit. For us, and I'm going to show you the image of this building, it's clearly Victorian. So the entire design of what we were doing there had to be subservient to the heritage building. You couldn't see our addition from the street. So it had to be hidden, had to be tucked behind. So, you know, we thought, what can we do? We looked at the program of this building, and the really most important thing, as you can imagine, in these smaller, older Victorian homes, there wasn't a large gathering space. So we proposed to put in a very large gathering space. You can see here at the back on the left-hand side, kind of in the lighter edition, that's the addition of the gathering space. with the interior spaces, trying to touch lightly as possible on them. And there's one thing to be hypocritical about someone's culture, so we try and be as respectful to these buildings as possible, adding on to the back in a place where there once was a garage. So the major move for us for this work was the addition of a gathering space that could accommodate gatherings inside and outside easily. There's a beautiful landscape component to this as well. And with this added a simple addition, aligned to the apex of the sun, so it's actually true north-south, and the angle of the roof is aligned to the highest point at the winter solstice. A little bit of landscape work there, some renderings from the inside, and you can see it's quite a kind of clean, modern addition, all done in cross-laminated timber, all out of wood. And here's a real shot for you guys. Under construction. We haven't been back there because we finished right in the middle of COVID. So we haven't been back to site since it's been done, but we'll get some good shots next time. Another project that we worked on is Moderator at Seneca. This building was all about the embedding of Indigenous knowledge and storytelling into the architecture of the building. So we did this work by layering Indigenous knowledge and teachings into the building and the landscape. So there are a few layers to the design here. One of the layers is the reference of a canoe pulling up to the shore and being turned on its side to create shelter. The overturned canoe being an analogy for creating a safe space, and in this case, a home away from home for Indigenous students. This slide shows the integration of the new form. So you can see the existing classroom in the dark and our new addition on the top. And so there's the existing classroom. And then this portion here is aligned with the rising sun on the summer solstice. So breaking the grid of the campus, breaking the grid of the existing colonial buildings, and honoring our natural systems. It's an outside kind of image of the canoe. Another layer to this is that it's similar to a longhouse or a teaching lodge. Seneca being one of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy members, we felt it was important to honor this. We try not to replicate historic forms in our work, but however, it made a lot of sense to reference it in this case. Further layer in this is that there's 28 ribs in this structure, and 28 ribs being the 28 days and the 13 moon cycles, the Indigenous ways of keeping time. So really lovely kind of reference to that. And then another layer is the shingle work on the exterior, which is reference to the ever-growing tree wampum, another Haudenosaunee marker. I should also mention that we did this work. The other projects, we were the prime architects on this work. We did in collaboration with Gow Hastings Architects. I'm going to do one more and then we'll be done. So try not to take up too much time. So this project is on the West Coast, UVic, National Center for Indigenous Laws. And this is working with the Coast Salish, the Kwungan people, the Songhees, the Esquimalt, the Wasanich people. They have a deep and historic relationship to the land, the water, the animals, and the trees. They believe they come from trees. And there's a really kind of beautiful connection here. And one of the things that we inherited this project after a feasibility study. So we often get pushed into building in a place that's not appropriate. And for us, we didn't feel that it was appropriate to build where it was suggested. Another part of this is actually listening. And what we did in this case is this was over COVID as well, and we had many conversations with elders, and we came up with 13 ideas that were very clearly cultural markers. And then we took those ideas and translated them into architectural or design ideas. So you're seeing the combination of those two, the ideas, the cultural markers on the left and the architectural translations on the right. The gray portion is the new existing building. Where they wanted to build it was on the far left, which had a whole bunch of old, really historic trees. And we suggested over a lot of time, we convinced them to move it around. And this building is now kind of a continuation. It's the Indigenous Law School that's addition to their existing law school, really meant to create a connective and cohesive whole. And I'm just going to run through a few more pictures here. Here's the image from the kind of that treed forest. The trees are removed just so that you can see. But really kind of an idea about path, an idea about movement, an idea about learning through that path and through that story. And I'm going to stop there. I do apologize. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's very inspiring. When I worked on my thesis, I used language as my ways into knowing space. And, we talked tonight about different ways of going into space through Indigenous ways of knowing. And when I was doing this work, I came upon a problem where I wasn't sure how I was going to do the questionnaire. So I ended up drawing the answers from language speakers, and just another way of knowing. And Matt does a lot of that very interesting work. Very grateful you're here tonight. Next to the podium, I would like to welcome Q Rock, a Anishinaabe interdisciplinary artist from Nipissing First Nations, for those who are coming to our Daniels building for this first time, you'll want to go to the north side up here on this side and see the work that Q's major installation here at the Daniels building, entitled Amber Magada. I don't know if I said that right. I hope I did. Q's multifaceted artist, from dancing to painting to music. Q Rock's art has allowed him to work closely with art directors, city officials, and corporate clients to make their vision come to life. He enjoys working with people and has collaborated with many artists on projects of all scales, from graphic books to videos to murals around the world. And you often walk through the city streets, you'll see Q Rock's work. It's pretty obvious. When the mural first went up, I was quite taken, especially with the red dots representing the finding of children. So your work is very inspirational. So please welcome Q Rock.
Ani Anishinaabe, Manitaniman Anishinaabe. I'm from Nipissing First Nations. I sit with the Wolf Clan. My tribe sits with the Deer Clan. And really honored to be here. Amazing people to be surrounded by. I have to say a big thank you to Elder Wabugu, because she literally convinced me to take on this project. I tried to talk her out of it at least 5 times. And I'm from a very different background than all of you guys. I call myself the Toronto Bronx native. It was actually a title given to me at a young age. I don't have any education in terms of institutions, but I have education with ceremony. I grew up with 2 pipe carriers, both my mother and my father. My Nokomis was a knowledge keeper for my reserve. She actually had to hide on the outskirts of my village for pretty much her whole life, until the native agents left Nipissing First Nations. And so when she came from Franks Bay to the northern shoreline of Garden Village, she was still speaking fluently Anishinaabe-Moan. And I spent a lot of time growing up around her, listening to my grandmother, listening to my great aunts, like her brothers and sisters. And I remember growing up with them, that they were always singing Anishinaabe-Moan around me. And I always thought I was special. I was like, wow, they're just singing for me. But that's actually a way that our language is passed on to our youth. Is it's done with the elders. Will actually take you and sit you on their knee, and they'll sing to you stories and just different, rhythms. Because sometimes some of the songs we have, they're not actually translated into any kind of words, but they have such an amazing vibration. And my whole life, I've fought to keep that vibration. So I consider the artwork that I do to be, in a sense, trying to create a bridge, because as I mentioned in my name, it's Toronto, the Bronx, and then the native part represents the land. Where I'm from is Nipissing, but I consider myself a descendant of Winona, and that's all Turtle Island. Growing up in a traditional way, then moving to the city was a culture shock for me. And I ended up finding something called hip hop culture. Now, hip hop culture started in the 70s, and so did powwows. A lot of people think powwows are this really old ancient thing that we did, but it was actually illegal for us to dance, illegal for us to speak our language. It was crazy. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to be illegal to be alive. My mother, my father, they lived through that. My mother went to a covenant house. My stepmother, June, went to a residential school called Spanish. My father went to a residential school. There's a lot of members in my family that actually had to go to these types of schools, including even some of my older brothers. I'm the youngest out of all my family. I'm the baby in the family, I guess you can say. I'm not a baby, but definitely the youngest. And I consider myself a young helper. I definitely am a firekeeper, but that's about as far as it goes for me when it comes to my, I guess, like, you know, my status in terms of like who I'm around in the circles that I'm around with. My father's name's Bobby Woods. My mother's name is Doreen Roy. They're both legends. My father was one of the main elders that took the sweat lodge, the sacred fires, our ceremonies, smudging, into the penitentiaries across Canada. And he did it with Vern Harper and some other natives that were part of this collective of elders that were just trying to reintroduce our culture to the inmates that were in these prisons. Back then, in the 80s and 90s, over 50% of the population that were inmates were Native inmates. And it's actually still the same way right now. We're only 2% of the population of this country, maybe a little bit higher now. But those statistics are just terrifying. So I didn't want to go to jail growing up, but my father did. My father spent 25 years in the Kingston Penitentiary. He didn't get a court date. He got arrested. 2 hours later, went to a judge's house. Then he was in Kingston Penitentiary by the time the day was over. He spent 25 years. No time off. He just came out. And when he came out, he met my mom. My mom and my Aunt Beatrice and my Auntie Linda were going to the penitentiaries and teaching the men how they're going to have to adapt to what's going to happen to them when they go back to their reserve. They're not going to be needed anymore. Their role is gone. The women have now taken their responsibility to raise the children on their own. And so my father and my mother's relationship was so inspiring to me. I saw pictures of my mom in 1972, and my dad is behind a chair. My mom has this like cool leather hat, you know, she had a lot of style. And she was sitting across from the table from them. And it was the first interaction they had in the Kingston Penitentiary. That's where they met. And my mother, she's an amazing person. In 1971, here in Toronto, she opened up the first addictions alcohol program for Native people. It was funded by the Addictions Research Foundation here in Toronto, and her nickname used to be Trailblazer. So I grew up with these two warriors. I just want to try to do my part. Growing up in the city, I had hip hop culture. So I fought against the institutions the entire time I was in school. I didn't graduate, but I ended up getting access to the pioneers of hip hop because of the devotion to the art forms of breakdancing, also known as b-boying or b-girling, to emceeing, to DJing, and to writing graffiti. And those four art forms were very similar to powwows. And I'm a grass dancer. So as soon as I hear a drum, that's where I'm headed. Boom, boom, boom. Because my people are going to be around that drum. And so when I was in New York, finding myself and trying not to like lose my values, I could fit in hip hop culture. And it's part of Western culture. It was created in the Bronx by the Black Nation and with influence from the Red Nation. The actual blueprint of hip hop and powwow go a lot deeper than a lot of people know. And there's a lot of research that you can do on your own. I don't want to talk about that though. Today, I want to talk about some of the artwork that I've created around the city and some of the reasons behind my artwork. This right here is at St. Lawrence Art Center, and this is a original land acknowledgement. It's really funny when I hear the land acknowledgement. It's so colonized. You only mention the human nation. You don't mention the 5 nations that were here before the human nation: the plant nation, the insect nation, the bird nation, the fish nation, the animal nation. Before humans came here, those nations agreed to let us live here. They counseled, and they all agreed to be our helpers, our teachers. And they had an original instruction given to them by the Creator. And that was, they must always provide nourishment for all those to follow. And so I grew up very in a gray area, because on one side of me, I know my teachings, I know my 7 grandfather teachings, I know how to use my medicine wheel, I know how to just to be me, be balanced, present in the moment, walking in prayer. I've learned how to do this stuff since a very young man, very young person. And then having hip hop culture, I learned how to be an artist in the Western sense. So I only use spray paint when I paint. This was all done by spray cans. It took me 4 days to do this. And this is dedicated to the survivors of the residential schools. On here, I included the 6 Nations Peace Treaty. I did my name in graffiti. This is like a character that's supposed to be me and my dog, my Ngut. And my mentee actually did that character for me. And if we could move to the next slide, please. This is my mother and my father, those 2 legends I was telling you about. My father's Bobby Woods on the right, my mom's Doreen Commander Roy on the left. And to me, I just want to be able to continue to be the bridge that they raised me to be, because having the ability to speak the Western language and still be able to not forget where I come from, I think is a really important thing. And I have an option that I can just go for success and just try to get famous if I really wanted to. I can see those avenues, but I know my role and my responsibility. I'll tell you guys something very personal. When my Nokomis was passing away, I was sitting next to her, and she asked me to make a promise to her. She said, make sure you do not forget the grandkids. Take care of all of the grandkids. And then she passed away. Now, some people, they might just take that literally and thinking just our immediate family. But I have a metaphor. But don't take it the wrong way. I'm not here to save my family tree. I'm here to save the forest, if I can. And part of the human nation development right now with the First Nations of Turtle Island is I'm following an old teaching about how the Red Nation one day will be reminding all the other nations how to reconnect to Mother Earth, how to reconnect. So what I try to create here is a visual healing experience. And I called that last painting a visual land acknowledgement. I'm trying to create spirit in the paintings, so I'm honoring both the physical world and the spiritual world. I studied the great Native artists. The art style that I do is not the woodland style. That's not even a correct term. The style of the woodlands comes from Wawa. Those are rock paintings. But I grew up studying those rock paintings, just like my uncles and my family. It was something that we were really into because I followed a lot of the geometry patterns. I was attracted to these numbers, especially with the medicine wheel. I kept on seeing those patterns of 4. I'd see patterns of 7, 13, 28 repeating themselves in my life. And so I wanted to be able to create the same education experience that I was given to anyone. So when I'm creating my paintings, I'm including some things that are supposed to be visually healing to you, whether you're aware of it or not. In my mom's face is the medicine wheel. It's divided by the yellow nation on the east, the red nation on her chin, the Black nation on the west and the white nation on the north. And if you can see, there's a fire. There's a blue fire, and it goes up into the medicine wheel at the very top above her head. My mother is such an inspiration to me. She inspires my art, my dance, my way of life. And I really wanted to give her something that was just different. So I try to do a bit of like Picasso mixed with the Norvell Morceau approach. But I was actually mentored by two amazing artists myself. One of the names of the artists I was mentored by is Leland Bell from Wicomiquan. And another artist that I was mentored by is my cousin, Perry McLeod. And I've studied those guys since I was a little kid. I was really known for grass dancing when I was young. My nickname used to be Rocky. And if you know anything about grass dancing, the first grass dancer, he was Anishinaabe and his name was Rocky Boy. And I've always had this, like, my traditional name, Manitsunimin, it translates to a spirit dancing. And I've always had the ability to dance. And when I went to New York City and I started hanging out with B-boys, they always were like, where did you learn that style? Because when I came out to dance and do top rocks, I was much more advanced than they were. They all had a very unique style because they were trying to actually imitate fancy dancers when they do the top rocks and breaking. They actually call it the Indian step as the foundation. One thing that's really dope that I learned about from the pioneers, the first B-boys, was that they named themselves Powwow and Sundance. From the Black Nation, from the Zulu Kings, the first two B-boys, their names are Powwow and Sundance. So I grew up with a very strong sense of pride of my culture and a strong sense of pride of trying to create some sort of visibility, living here in Western culture, surrounding me in the center of it, trying to find a way to be visible, to be heard. Hip hop was a platform, but it wasn't enough for me. And so I started painting murals about 4 years ago. I asked somebody in my crew who's a graffiti writer, and I was like, I want to learn how to paint murals because I already knew how to paint graffiti. And so he taught me, took me under his wing. I have to shout out him because he's an amazing artist and he's my mentor. He taught me how to do this stuff. His name is Alexander Bacon, and he's an absolutely amazing street artist from Toronto. The next slide, please. So this is just like a straight on version of the two murals itself. From the visual land acknowledgement, I have the insect nation, the animal nation. I have the Turtle Island representation. A lot of the symbols that I'll use are kind of layered because just like I want to give everyone as much as I can. I'm not trying to be shy with the teachings. So with the Bear Nation, it's actually the Bear Nation is the only nation that speaks to all 6 nations. It eats the plants, it eats the insects, it eats the fish, it eats the birds, it eats the humans, it eats other animals. And so this is a very powerful symbol in the Anishinaabe culture. And I wanted to create a visual healing experience. And the bear is the medicine clan for the Anishinaabe. And so that's why I put the Bear Nation. I put the 2 fish there to represent the polarity teachings, the importance of understanding that there is duality in all life. I included a lot of different symbols that are sacred to my people. And I wanted to create a space where if Anishinaabe or First Nations people or Six Nations people come, that when they come to these areas, they feel at home, they feel safe. Next slide, please. This is the hawk and black red winged bird, it's called. And this is at St. Lawrence and Weston. And this was like my 2nd or 3rd mural. And I was really just playing around with like the combination of like my family's backgrounds. So my father's actually Cree and Haida First Nations, but my mom is Ojibwe and Odawa. I'm from the Three Fires Confederacy, and Anishinaabe is my language. So when I say I'm Anishinaabe, I'm really from the Ojibwe tribe, in case you're ever wondering the differences of why we say those things. The way I was raised, I speak a very unique dialect. It's from Nipissing, and all of the Anishinaabe have their own individual dialects. So I was really grateful to be where I'm from because we have a really unique art style as well. And a lot of our art style is actually about adapting and using our influences to continue with the sacred geometry patterns, but also try to find and reinvent new ways of sharing these teachings that have been around for thousands of years. Next slide, please. So this character, you'll see it is quite consistent throughout all of my designs. This is Nana Bojo. If you ever hear like Anishinaabe people, they'll say Bojo. And Bojo comes from the character who was one of the first two children of Winona. Winona had two children. One was named Makwa and the other one was Nana Bojo. And so I include Nana Bojo and I give him those two feathers. Sometimes they're two ears. And they are symbolic to, like I mentioned, the polarity, the balance of all life, duality, masculinity and femininity of all life. There's 7 rings around this sun, and those are representation of the 7 grandfather teachings. The next slide, please. This is my first mural that I ever did. And this is at the DuPont and DuPont and Dundas West. It's called the Junction Bridge. And I included the story, the creation story, and the Anishinaabe creation story. And there are actually many creation stories. So this was the one about the creator, when the creator was basically creating Winona. And then it's before she became before she was lowered down to Mother Earth. And the Mayengun clan, actually, the Wolf clan in the Anishinaabe culture actually helped us with our language in the beginning. The Wolf clan walked around and helped the Anishinaabe name everything and basically was helping us with our language in the very beginning. And so I want to include the Mayengun clan, not only because I'm part of it, but because it's such a strong symbol with the relationship with the animal nation and the human nation. That character at the very end there, that's like a representation kind of like of me breaking when I first was a kid and still living fairly strong in spirit, but then shortly after, Western culture tried to get me, but they didn't succeed. The next slide, please. Turtle Island. So this is cool that I'm here with a bunch of architects because I think your guys' work is absolutely amazing. I'm always inspired because as a writer, when I look at a wall, I have to think, how am I going to make my painting have the best effect on that wall? And so I'm looking at the architecture. I just don't know what the heck I'm looking at. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what's going on, but I know how that I have to apply what I need to apply to make it effective. This actually building right here is at 20 Brunel Court. And there's an architect firm called Zaz, I believe. And so they actually won Architect Design of the Year. And one of the reasons why they won from the, in terms of the description from the committee who chose them, is they said that they were really impressed with how the mural complemented their building, the overall design. And this is something I'm super proud of because this is my first project where I was the lead artist and I did it solo. So I was super happy with the results. And I wrote a turtle across in like classic 90s New York graffiti style. And that's a classic B-boy pose. Next slide, please. This is at City Hall. I've had an amazing experience working with City of Toronto. Like, it's crazy. It's the opposite of how I was treated in New York. In New York, they have something called the Vandal Squad. It's literally police for graffiti writers. And so you can imagine the anxiety of wanting to paint graffiti in New York City. It's too much. But here in Toronto, I've been embraced, and they actually offered me an opportunity to say, hey, you want to like stop doing that graffiti stuff and start getting paid to do it? And definitely I said yes, and I'm grateful for it. And it's been a really positive thing on my life. So big shout out to Street Art Toronto because they've created majority of these opportunities that I've received. Next slide, please. These are just styles that I've been playing with. You know, to try to visualize spirit. I love how Norvell Morceau coined the phrase, you have to imagine an X-ray photo of spirit. And I've always been trying to implement that X-ray photo of spirit in all the work that I do. So I use a lot of shapes in circles to represent a lot of the duality of things. And it's always in 2s, 4s, 7s, just to stay consistent with the teachings that I'm trying to, you know, trying to share. Next slide, please. So this is the overall building. So when I spoke to the architects, they actually told me when they designed it, they wanted it to look like a turtle because they did their research, and before, this area of Toronto was a swamp. So if there would be a building that would be coming out, they wanted to look like it was kind of like coming out of the water and kind of emerging itself into the land. And as soon as they said that, I just knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do, and this was my first land acknowledgement using the Six Nations Peace Treaty story. And I kind of started it from west going to east, and it being kind of like, you know, just following a story of how all the nations came together and how the human nation now is just basically trying to, I'm trying to share the teachings, but not be too obvious about everything. I still have that graffiti side in me where I like to layer things so that if you look at my piece, maybe the first or second time, you're not going to see everything. It's going to take you a lot more than that to look at everything and actually see the effects. Behind the eagle, going on to the left facing, is a humongous wolf face. And yeah, this is the slide. It's to me, this was one of my favorite pieces I've done in Toronto. And the next slide, please. This was I feel like this to me really changed me. This made me realize that I needed to do something more political with my art. And so when I was asked to do these tree hoardings, I wasn't sure of like what I was gonna do, because I was like, you know, it's such a small and such a weird shape. But then I was like, wait a second, it's a circle. That's a medicine wheel. Wait a second. And then everything just kicked in. And so what I started to realize I wanted to do is I wanted to tell a story about how it feels, that energy, to go to school for the first day, since this is at the Hart Park in the U of T campus. And I was like, but these kids aren't going to the schools that everyone else is going to. These kids were lining up to go to residential school. And that's why they're at the spirit direction right there. So that's the eastern doorway being open. And this is my ancestors, the people that unfortunately didn't make it. This was the line that they were going to. You know, when I think about residential schools, you know, like I have terrible stories that I heard, and I've never really been able to build up the courage to retell them. You know, when my mother told me some of the things that happened when she went to the Covenant House for the school she went to, like it just broke my heart. I was filled with so much anger, and I just didn't know the direction I really wanted to take. Do I really want to try to build with non-Native people? Because no one believes us. And this happened for so long. I remember telling my friends that, you know, I was Native, and they were like, in America, some of my friends were like, nah, you can't be. Natives are extinct. You got to be something else, bro. And I was like, nah, B, I'm Native. Like, I know I'm Native. I grew up with my culture. I can speak this language. It's called Anishinaabe-Moan. And I started getting people's attention. But for most parts, most people wouldn't believe me when they started to get to know me. And then if I felt like, hey, this is an opportunity to bond with somebody and share a personal side of me, my friends wouldn't believe me when I told them about residential schools. And it was insane to me, because I was like, how do I know this? And all the people from my res know this. And everywhere else I meet natives, they know this. But everyone else around us doesn't know. And we're only 2% of the population. Like I just would imagine that information would spread, would be shared, but it just seemed to be silent. And so when I'm doing my work, I'm trying to make some noise and inspire people to, like, you know, to feel comfortable to talk about these things. This is obviously, you know, to me, it brings out a lot of emotions, you know, and I wanted to show the scale of all the kids. So if you actually go around the whole thing, it starts off with like little guys all the way to like high school students. Next slide, please. And this is a style of like an Anishinaabe style that's kind of from Nipissing, you know, mixed with a little bit of my, you know, my inspirations that I've included in there. But this is, again, the creator with Winona, and then Turtle Island, and then just kind of like the story of how like the Woodlands people is what they used to call us, how the Woodlands is going around, and then on the other side is where the children, it goes from a tree skyline to a human skyline, and then into the spirit world. And I think is that the last one? No, one more. Oh yes, of course. The whole reason I'm here. Crazy, so crazy. I'm so nervous right now. I haven't like spoken. I like teach on like Zoom in my living room where I have a wild husky and a crazy cat doing their stuff behind me all the time. And like, this is way different like right now. So this was challenging because I had no idea how I was going to make this happen. But Elder Wabagoon gave me this confidence to just go through and try it. Because everything I had done up until that point was just like painting murals with spray cans. I knew I couldn't paint windows. So I took my iPad and I drew this while I was chilling in Edmonton, mentoring one of my brothers. What this is a symbol of is, has multiple meanings. So on the left-hand side, you have the grandfather son, and on the right-hand side, you have grandmother moon. And in grandfather son is the 7 grandfather teachings, and in grandmother moon is the medicine wheel teachings. And I'm sharing the Anishinaabe wheel that's from this region. So the yellow is the center because that's where you start. And then the red nation would be the southern direction, the black nation would be in the west direction, and the white nation would sit in the north direction. And so it's in that layer. These are kind of like some of the subtle ways I like to improvise and change a bit of the art direction of how I was taught to do a medicine wheel, but it's still in the symbol of the circle, and it still represents the directions, the 4 winds, as the Anishinaabe would say. The 2 children, it's a brother and sister, and they're being carried away by the eagle. And the eagle actually is carrying fish with them for the journey, because this is a long journey for my people. This is an opportunity for all of us now to make some serious changes of how we treat First Nations people in Canada. I think that there is a very weird area of sensitivity that we need to get over. And the only way that we're going to get over it is that if we begin to communicate with respect. There are protocols in our communities, and each nation has their own. So I would love to like just inspire you guys to do that research so that you can communicate, because I know for a fact that the elders are waiting. They do want to tell their story now. And in some communities, it is happening. And I would love to see that continuing to happen, allowing elders to come up here and tell their stories because they deserve it. The red dots are a representation of the 215 children that were discovered at the British Columbia Kamloops Residential School. This project isn't finished yet. One of the goals that the group that I was working with, and I was working with a team on this project, although I came up with the design, how everything happened was a serious team effort. My part was the easiest part. I drew this in 25 minutes on my iPad. But to get this installed was like a 6-month process, even longer. And it took a lot of people to come together to make it happen. And it was the visuals that I wanted. It was better than I expected it would have turned out. This is a project that really inspired me to continue to do what I'm doing. And I've actually found more direction through this project. Following the steps of what my mom and dad were doing, I was kind of trying to figure out, what the heck am I doing here? Am I just like, I'm living this artist lifestyle, and I was starting to feel a little bit guilty that I was living so easy while people around me and my family were still struggling really bad. And so I started to decide that I needed to do more work. I need to dream bigger because I have the ability to do these things. So you're going to see a lot more work from myself. If you've driven around the TTC, you might have seen the subway maps that have the medicine wheel teachings. That's my design. I created that. And I'm going to continue to try to do stuff where it's creating an experience where it's not only a visual healing experience, but it's an education experience. I just want to leave you guys with this one last thing. In my culture, the education system is from ceremony. These symbols, the sacred geometry patterns, these are all ways to put yourself back into your natures. And with the medicine wheel teachings, it teaches us that every human has 4 natures that they're supposed to develop and nurture a relationship with themselves. A lot of us are taught external. Everything is coming from an outside source. But in Anishinaabe, there are 7 directions that we can move. And the medicine wheel teaches us the foundation of the first 4, but I'd like to leave you with the last 3. The last 3, well, first of all, the first 4 are the 4 directions of the 4 winds. So you have north, south, east, and west. But once you start to learn how to put yourself into the moment, and I usually do that through practicing gratitude, is you'll start to discover that you can move more. And you can also move up, down, and within. So Chemigwech, it's been an honor for me to be here. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the stuff.
Thank you very much, Q Rock. That was pretty fascinating. I'm really grateful you're here tonight. This is a show I might take on the road. We got some pretty good presenters. Our last presenter tonight is Shannon Simpson. Shannon is Anishinaabe and Scottish and a member of the Mississaugas of Alderville First Nations. Shannon is the director of the Office of Indigenous Initiatives here at the University of Toronto. Shannon brings the perspective of the office who oversees the supports the U of T's response to the 34 calls to action. And as a result, the U of T's, as a result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we worked on in 2016, I think it is. So please welcome Shannon Simpson.
Miigwech James and Miigwech Elder Wabagoon for your beautiful opening today to open up this event in a good way. I would also first like to note that I believe it's extremely unfair that I had to follow these 3 speakers when I am not an artist or an architect. So bear with me. I've just heard some amazing things so far. So I'm going to talk to you about a project that I'm personally really excited about, the Indigenous landscape at Tattle Creek, which is a project we've been working on here at U of T for a number of years now. And it is a direct response from, as Elder Wabagoon had mentioned, the 34 calls to action. And within those 34 calls to action, the calls to action are in 6 categories, and one of those categories is about space. So this is directly related to that category about space and having specific spaces on campus that are Indigenous spaces, led by Indigenous people and built and created for Indigenous students, staff, faculty, elders, and community in general. I'm going to try and do this myself. So this is a picture from, I believe, 1859. So it shows Tattle Creek. What you're seeing is the front campus, where it says front campus, and that's University College behind it. Where the word Tattle Creek is approximately where this project would be, right around that area and a bit to the east of that. This is what really led the project to be called the Indigenous landscape at Tattle Creek. One of the first things done was that we got together an advisory committee of Indigenous students, staff, faculty, elders, and knowledge keepers, as well as representatives from 6 nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Wendat Nation. So everyone came together along with the host territory nations to talk about what this space could look like. And immediately from the very first meeting, obviously we were talking about building a landscape on top of a buried creek. And everyone there thought it has to be centered around water and this creek. We have to honor the water. We have to find a way to make this project really special and centered around water in that creek that is still flowing underneath. And we, of course, most of us were like, dig it up, but we were told that's not a good idea. So this shows the campus not in 1859, more in current day, where you can see the front campus on the left side just is showing the area, and then the highlighted area on the right side is the exact area where the landscape project would be. And it's about 50% of the green space that is in front of Hart House. And for those of you that might be familiar with that space, you might be thinking, aren't there cannons there? Isn't there a piece of art? And you're right, there are cannons and a piece of art, and there was a flagpole. The flagpole has been moved and the cannons and the art will be relocated. So it will be a space that will just be something that we can expand on for this landscape. So this is, again, just a closer view of the project. It's outlined in red. It has the walking path that kind of cuts diagonally through the middle, will be kind of the eastern border of the project. So we're just really excited. What the advisory committee wanted was something central, something very, very much not tucked away in a corner or hidden in the floor of a building, where historically a lot of the Indigenous spaces on campus have been. They wanted something that all students, not just Indigenous students, use that space, walk through that space, will go there and eat lunch, will do everything, a variety of things there. So we're really excited that it is so central and in such a great spot on campus. So fairly quickly, when the advisory committee got together and we kind of had agreed on a theme, we knew we had to do a lot of consulting and engagement. And we were working with really great partners at the university, but we knew that when you do consulting and engaging with Indigenous community, it can often look a little bit different than maybe what the university partners were used to. But they were really great. We knew it was going to take a while. It probably went on for around a year. There was pop-up sessions that happened on campus in busy student buildings. They would come with their displays to events at First Nations House and other Indigenous spaces on campus. They were in classrooms. They would come if there was a conference that was Indigenous specific, just to provide ample opportunity for people to engage in the project, for people to look at the initial designs, to give feedback. And this slide is just showing one of those sessions where they did a presentation, and student, staff, faculty, community, anyone could come and engage in the project and say, this is missing, or I don't like that part of it. And all of that feedback was really helpful in really guiding what the project was going to look like. So this slide is showing some of the main elements of the project. On the bottom left is what, it won't be called this probably in the end, but we're currently just calling it the Knowledge House. It has a fire pit in the center, and it has seating around it. So it's a gathering space as well for people to be at. There are cultural markers, which is in the top left side, that will be in the 4 directions. And they're also an opportunity to add art and to add language to the project. There is an amphitheater that is the picture right beside the cultural markers. So that is a space where people can gather, where we can do traditional teachings, similar to what we could use the Knowledge House for. There could be outdoor classes happening there, workshops, as well as it's a space when it's not booked for a specific teaching or event or class. It's just a space that anyone can gather, eat their lunch, hang out, do whatever, relax, whatever they need to do. And then on the right-hand side here is, well, it's a full picture of the whole thing, but we are making sure that it's all Indigenous plants that go into the gardens, the borders, so the trees, shrubs, plants. There'll be medicines. Most of the Indigenous plantings would be considered medicines anyways. So we're really excited that anything being added to the space will be an Indigenous plant. So this is an up close of the Knowledge House. So again, it's just going to be a great spot for ceremony, for teaching. It has the fire pit. The hole in the roof obviously is to let smoke escape. And this space, as well as the amphitheater space, will be bookable spaces. So if classes or teachings are going to be happening there, we can ensure that those spaces can be prioritized for Indigenous community here at U of T. This is showing through a lot of the consultation engagement. We heard of the importance of star mapping and astrological mapping, and the importance of having some elements of that in the project. So there are going to be constellations etched into the roof of the knowledge house. So when you're in it and you look up, you'll be able to see the constellations, and they will be done specific to constellations that are specific to many Indigenous nations. So right now we're using the Anishinaabe or the Ojibwe a guide. That's what's guiding the patterns right now, but we're trying to have it to be inclusive to ones that are significant to a lot of our nations. So this is just another perspective of entering from the western side. That's a cultural marker that shadow person is looking at, and then it heads straight to the knowledge house. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, because as I mentioned, water is central, and you're probably thinking you haven't mentioned anything about water. So how so is it central? So as you can see here, as you're heading towards the knowledge house, on either side of that path, it looks a little bit blue, and that is something that is going to create the image of a creek or a riverbed. It has river rocks in it, like placed in it, which you can see in the smaller slide, which is the rainwater feature. This shows a little bit more detail about it, and what is to happen is when it rains, the roof of the knowledge house will collect water and it will drain off the knowledge house, and because of the grading of the pavement, it will be directed to those two riverbeds, and then the water will flow down to the gardens at the base. So maybe a lot of people will run inside when it rains, but the first time it rains, I'm going to run over there and see if the water is doing what it's supposed to be doing, to create that illusion of the creek, and to remind people that that's what's running underneath it, and that underneath this project, and that's what's really, really central and important to this project. All the seating, or the majority of the seating, will be made out of reclaimed wood. You might be, if you've been on campus at all, if you're not from U of T, there's a major landscape project happening in front of University College and the whole front campus. And because of that project, a few trees had to be removed, but U of T partnered with a company called Just Be Woodsy, and they are making furniture, tables, indoor and outdoor furniture out of the trees that were removed from that landscape project. I've already seen some of the pieces. They're absolutely beautiful. There's some on campus that are outdoors. There's some inside at First Nations House. I'm sure there's pieces all over campus. But these will be, those trees will be made into the benches that you will find on this space. So we're really excited about that as well. That I've gone off script and I shouldn't do that. Okay, oh, I see what I'm doing here. So this talks a little bit about the Indigenous plantings. It just gives you a little bit of a sense of some of the trees and shrubs considered for the project. Sugar maples, serviceberry or Saskatoon berry, eastern redbud, birch, cedar, pine. Those are some of the trees that will be added to the space, along with some of the other traditional medicines and smaller plants and shrubs that will go into the gardens. So we're really, really excited to do that. And we're planning to use an Indigenous nursery to source those plants. So as much as possible, we're trying to use Indigenous businesses to support the project as well. This next slide, I won't have to say too much about because you've already seen it a couple of times, I think, because we have, so it's Susan's piece, and this is Q's piece as well for the tree protection zone. So this is actually, the construction hoardings are around the trees for the Indigenous landscape piece, and my office and Heart House and the Art Museum and lots of other partners at U of T really thought this was a great idea to get that space, to get people excited about that space, and to have art on campus, and to really liven up that space. And I think it's just been so amazing. I'm so glad that we're back on campus, because when it was done, which I believe was last summer, people couldn't see it for a long time because there wasn't very many of us here. So I'm glad that we're back and we're able to see this work. It was curated by 2 Indigenous faculty here at U of T, Maria Hupfield and Migwans. So that has been a really exciting project to have. And even though I'll be sad to see it go, it will mean that the landscape project is coming to fruition. That's really all I have for you today. We are very hopeful that the project will start very soon. There have been some delays with the construction strike and the supply chain and all of the things that are kind of impacting a lot of things right now, but we're really hopeful that it will get started really soon and hopefully be done hopefully by the end of next summer. And then we can start to really have that space on campus that Indigenous students are going to know is their space. It's a space that they helped create. It's visible. People are going to see it, as well as the non-Indigenous community at U of T will be able to engage with this space as well and learn. And I think it's just going to be such a great opportunity. And I'm really, really excited for this. And I'm hopeful. And I'm not even just hopeful. I know it's the first of many. I think we're going to continue with this kind of work at U of T to create more spaces for Indigenous students, and all students, really. It's not just for Indigenous students. Everyone's going to benefit from this. So thank you so much.
We have a few minutes. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but I'd like to invite the panelists now to come up and sit on the stage. We have a few questions we'd like to ask. So at this time, would you please, the 4 of you come up, the 3, yeah. And, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. That was, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It was very, very inspirational, and it's nice to be able to be on a stage talking Indigenous, all Indigenous. And it's a place now that we've begun to activate in many ways. I've formatted a few questions, and perhaps we'll go through them. You know, there's so much to ask, and the conversation can go in so many ways. So fortunately, I didn't have a lot of time to, well, I could have asked a lot of questions. I'll start with you, Susan. How would you define space interventions in regards to your work when it comes to reconciliation?
Space interventions.
Space interventions, yes.
Can you repeat the question?
How would you define space interventions in regards to your work when it comes to reconciliation?
Yeah, that's a good question, James. I'm not overly concerned with being reconciliatory at this moment. While I understand that things have to get better, that is not a movement or emotion that I'm particularly interested in. What I am interested in is the assertion of Anishinaabeg sovereignty and our aesthetics as they are practiced through our cultural production. And so that intervening in space is something that I take as, I guess, within this sort of spirit of rebelliousness, as well as my background in being an activist. So the claiming of space is something that I do because it's our right to do it. And I do think that there's a certain power in remaining somewhat illegible to non-Anishinaabe speakers or non-Anishinaabe people. Like, I think there is something to maintaining the integrity of our language and our epistemologies, and remaining a little bit, I guess, esoteric in that sense, simply because this has been an exercise for 500 years where we have been faced with the hegemony and dominance of English. At this point, I think it's okay to allow art viewers working a little bit to understand a piece. So define space intervention. I would say that an action done not necessarily with state or municipal permission, but is something that intervenes in a narrative that seeks to erase us. The intervention is in making sure that we're not forgotten, obscured, or erased from what is rightfully our place here. Yeah, and that's for all the things that Q-Rock mentioned and Matthew and Shannon both mentioned, which is a commitment to our ancestors, both past and future.
Thank you very much. Wow, that is so wonderful. The next question is for Matthew. As a practitioner, how would you frame your work to include reconciliation in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, our work in architecture, as I said in my talk a little bit earlier, is really about trying to educate, to bring truth to conversations. And we build buildings at the end of the day, but it's things like this, these meetings, these conversations, working with artists, that really start to change the way that people think about things. It's that education part. It's the allowance for the mainstream world, if you will, to see all the power that's embedded in thousands of years of Indigenous knowledge that's been pushed to the side for 150 plus years, officially pushed to the side for 150 plus years. But I think what's happening now, and I think, whether it's reconciliation or not, what I think is happening now is people are starting to wake up to the value of our knowledge, of our relationship with not only the land, but our relations that are here. And people are starting to see the power in that. They're realizing what we've been doing for the past 150 years is not working. We're not healthy people. We're not living in healthy cities. We're not studying on healthy campuses. There's ways of thinking about buildings. There's ways of thinking about the processes and even the education, the curriculum that's going on in those buildings from an Indigenous point of view that's going to help everyone, not just Indigenous people, but also mainstream people come to these universities, and also our relations that we've been displacing in cities. Tidal Creek is a perfect example of this. Displaced, buried, and that's one creek of many that's occurred. And not just the creek doesn't just go, that supported animal life, insect life, everything around that has been buried to some degree. So for me, to come back to the answer of your question, it's really about allowing people to see the power of Indigenous knowledge through architecture, through built form. It's really about education for me.
Thank you very much. It reminds me of the prophecy times that we're in many First Nations and Indigenous, across both North America and South America, talk about this time that we're in, where the world will come to ask for our knowledge in order to help heal our nation, for our world, really. So we're in that time, and it's obvious today from all the speakers. The next question for Shannon. 5 years since the presentation of 34 calls to action from the U of T steering committee, how has the university progressed since then in answering these calls, and what pressing work needs to be completed?
Well, it's kind of a big question. I think, so it has been just over 5 years now since the report was handed to the institution basically. And there was, I think we got off to a really, really strong start. Like, I think there was a lot of excitement, as there often is, and a lot of things were happening right away. There was a lot of hires. There was a lot of faculty hires that happened right away, because I've been at the institution for a very, very long time, and faculty wasn't really increasing, staff wasn't really increasing for a very, very long time. And then all of a sudden, after this report, we got a whole bunch more faculty across all 3 campuses. Staff positions are popping up. COVID, like COVID did to everything, kind of put a bit of a pause on things. But I think that we did get off to a strong start. We did get some space conversations happening. There is a purpose-built Indigenous space happening at on the Scarborough campus. There is one in talks at Mississauga campus. Mississauga campus has actual purpose-built space on their campus within buildings. So things are happening. I think there's always, like, as long as the institution remembers that we're just beginning. Like, we're not close to done, and we don't want to lose the momentum that we've had. And I think that's everyone's fear, is that a couple things are going to happen and then they'll move on to a different interest. So I'm hopeful that we can keep this on the forefront, and I'm hopeful that we can keep moving ahead and keep things happening. Students have been asking for it for years and years and years. So we need to keep talking to students, finding out what they would prioritize, and then working to get those things happening. So I think we've got to continue with space. We've got to continue with increasing the Indigenous community here at U of T in terms of the student population and the staff and faculty population, getting more elders on campus, getting the curriculum. There's a lot of departments and divisions that just have no content in any of their courses. So we're working with a lot of different departments on that as well. Research, there's just all the fields. We just need to keep going and keep moving forward.
Thank you very much. Shannon's office, Indigenous Initiatives, is an incredible office. She does a lot of work and covers a lot of ground. I'm very grateful for the work you do. Q Rock, you really inspired me. I got to tell you, I want to see some dance moves, actually. But can you elaborate and give a specific example of how your dance and art address reconciliation?
I grew up a grass dancer. And when you're taught about the ceremony of powwows and what it means, it's a celebration of life. And as a grass dancer, I'm a warrior in my community, but not typical warrior in the Western sense. The role and responsibility of me as a warrior, number one, it's forbidden for me to take a life. It's absolutely forbidden. I can't kill another human being. But in order for me to act in the spirit of a warrior, my job is to take opportunities to defend those that can't defend themselves, or save someone and sacrifice my own life in order to allow them to continue on in their ways. Growing up in hip hop, having that foundation allowed me to have a voice in Western culture, and it taught me about the power that I harnessed through art. Dancing as a grass dancer is a huge role and responsibility. Almost any dancer well, not almost, every dancer at the powwow potentially is there to help those that are going through tough times to heal. Sometimes someone will come up to me and they'll offer me some tobacco and they'll say, "Can you please dance for my auntie or my cousin?" And so my immediate awareness of what I'm doing from that moment forward is nothing to do with me. It has everything to do about that family and that person and that request, and me honoring that protocol of them giving me that tobacco. And dancing has always been a huge part of my life. My name means spirit dancing. And since I was, as long as I could remember, I've always been dancing. My grandmother used to do like this funny thing where she would spread she lived in the elders complex on my reserve. And that's kind of like it was fancy when I was growing up because they had a pool table in the bingo hall there. And so I used to hang out with the elders complex all the time. And my grandmother used to move her coffee table apart. She had this old coffee table that was kind of like this, where it divided into two sections. And my great uncle, my great aunt Martha, my great uncle Gilbert, and a few other elders from the complex, they'd come in and watch me dance, and I just entertain them. And I knew that from a very young age that being a dancer was a responsibility. And in everything that I do in art, I'm trying to make the wall dance. I'm trying to make, when I do graffiti, I'm trying to make my letters dance. So it's all about the visual effect. One thing that I really gravitated to at a young age is that when I paid attention, I learned a lot. And as I started to understand my culture, I learned that everything was done through observation. And so I was very observant at a young age. And I was able to pick up on a lot of cool things that helped me progress. So dancing to me is like, it's part of my lifestyle. I'm always going to be dancing. And I think it helps to create a bridge for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, because we may not speak the same language, but when I dance and you dance, we are communicating. And I love that. I love that way of communicating.
Thank you very much. It says here to ask Nini if there's questions on Zoom. Okay, audience, yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
There are people. Tansei, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for an amazing presentations this evening. My name is Jennifer. I work in the city's Indigenous Affairs Office. And my question, a lot of my work is around advancing Indigenous placemaking and placekeeping. And I've had the pleasure of working with Matthew and lots of amazing people in community. My question is, what do you see as the role of large institutions like the City of Toronto, municipalities, in this work? We find ourselves often in this sort of uneasy relationship sometime with community where, there's a reluctance to engage. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the roles of large institutions like a municipality, colonial institutions that have, part of our work is focused on really trying to change things from within, but that is going to take a long time. So in the meantime, as we're working through some of those uncomfortable conversations and trying to sort of shift ways of thinking and knowing and doing, I'm just interested in your thoughts on the role of cities like the City of Toronto.
Susan, how would you like to answer that?
I guess I was thinking a little bit about directing it at Susan because of your comments around being an activist and those interventions and how that connects with, or just does not connect at all with, work going on in institutions like the city.
Yeah. This is one of the questions, Jennifer, right? Like, this is a really important question. I think that there are things that can be done at that level, at the municipal level, at the institutional level, in offering space and fair compensation to artists. That's a primary thing, right? Is artistic control and fair compensation for our labor and our ideas. So there's that. And the hope, I think, is that sort of visual representation, the ideas that are communicated, the ideas that are opened up, and the dialogues that occur by all of the work that's being done, just even on this stage. The hope with that is that it moves, I guess, somebody who sees it to move from those sort of symbolic gestures to land back, right? Because none of this is going to make a difference unless we are all sort of working towards the repatriation of Indigenous land back to Indigenous people. That is what we're fighting for, because without our land, and right now we have less than 2% or 0.2% in Canada is under Indigenous control. And so that issue of land is still very real, land being the most contested arena within settler colonialism. Without the land, it becomes very difficult to be Indigenous peoples. And so to answer your question, I guess, or to at least think alongside what you're offering, it is that artistic control, fair compensation, and offering space are primary things that can actually be very helpful. You know, as Indigenous peoples walk through the city, they see Q Rock's work, or they see the work of two-row architects, or they see a space on campus that is reflecting their identity back to them. That's empowering, that matters, and it makes a difference. And I've seen a lot of change since Ogima Mikana first started working in 2012 in terms of the city making material commitments to Indigenous presence, to reflecting Indigenous identity within the city. So that those things, you know, these types of projects have resonance. They do have effects that ripple outward. When we first started doing the street signs, you know, there was a small contingent of people who, you know, threatened to charge us with vandalism or to say that we were destroying private property. But a vast majority were actually intrigued by the idea. And we got calls from urban planners. We got calls from architects. We got calls from the city. We got calls from people at the Thunder Bay Airport and all sort of different arenas, not just art viewers. So I think that it does have an effect, but I'd like to hear from other people on the panel about that question. Like you, for instance.
We talked about this a fair amount, but I mean, for me, it's really about policies and embedding the change of policies. For example, heritage that I was speaking about earlier, we often look at buildings as the heritage of this place. And really, it's not. They're a blip in time, as I say often. And that conversation needs to affect change within the written guidelines that oversee our, you know, particularly from my point of view, the buildings that we're building here, the way that we're planning parks, how we give access to fires in places, all these things that are really embedded in policies that control us and how we do things. And one could say that it's not building a great city. It's an okay city, but there are things that we can do a lot better. And if we lean into place, if we lean into our understanding of our relations around us and the understanding of what we've learned or knowledge for thousands of years, then we're going to make a better place. I say it's not just for us as humans, but for our relations as well. So to me, it goes back to all those things that people blindly follow because they have to within city policies.
Yeah, I don't know if this thing on. No. I agree with what Susan and Matt have said. I think if I think of it from U of T perspective as a large institution, I think that U of T has a responsibility to do something. I think that it's not something you can kind of opt out of. Like U of T has a responsibility to create space, to create safe spaces for Indigenous students, to make sure Indigenous students feel like they belong, like Indigenous students are welcome. And I think the City of Toronto has a responsibility as well. So I think that it's not sort of should we or shouldn't we? They absolutely should, and they absolutely should be engaging with Indigenous communities to make sure it's done in a good way and done in the right way. But I don't think it's an option anymore. I don't think it ever was an option, but I think some people did think it was an option. But I think that there is this responsibility, and they need to take that seriously.
Q, could you end us off? I just got the marker that we are run over time, so.
I'm not really sure how to answer that question, but one thing that like really stood out about the work that my father was doing was that he was sensitizing the prison inmates with the people that were working with the prisoners. And he actually went through the process of teaching non-Indigenous people the creation story, the sweat lodge ceremony, the sacred fire, the four sacred medicines, and also gave them a broader view about the differences amongst the tribes. I think that would be really helpful to non-Indigenous people, is to have that experience, to learn and understand a bit more about who we are from our teachers, our elders. And kind of like goes back to where I ended off before about our elders having that platform, giving Elder Wabagoon the opportunities to have this space and to be able to share knowledge and their point of view. But for me, like, you know, like I'm very like, I don't know. I think about these things, but I don't have any answers, but I'm determined to find ways to edge myself closer and closer to that goal of, you know, doing my part. And it's a very small part, but as an artist, like, I just try to find ways to communicate with everyone and, you know, and create an education experience at the same time. So I hope I inspire a lot of Native people to come to the city and not be so afraid to share our culture. There's a lot of hesitation. I have elders that I always invite here and they're like, nope, I don't want to go to the big smoke. And I would love to see that those bridges that are created are used more often. And we start inviting some of these elders of the surrounding communities. There's a lot of reserves that surround Toronto. And there is a group of Mississaugas that are from here too as well. And like, we have so much access around us of so much amazing knowledge. And, you know, I'm a student of life and I'm always going to treat it that way. And I just want to like make sure that, you know, I continue to do that 7th-generation thinking of past, present, future, and how that's going to affect everyone. And in hopes that it inspires others to, you know, to do the same or do something similar. And I know that right now, like there's a lot of people willing to meet each other halfway, which I've never seen before. So that's super promising to me because I've always been trying to find ways to get people's attention. I make hip hop music and none of my music has ever been popular because it's positive. But if I went the negative direction, I think I probably would have blew up because I have the skills for it, but I just didn't want to sell out and do like that direction of promoting negativity. So the hardest thing to do in life is anything positive. So if the work is hard, just know that the reward is going to be good.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much. I know we've run a little over time, and I'm going to ask Nini now to close this out. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. So a big round of applause for our. Hello, my name is Nini Brody. I'm the Manager, External Relations and Outreach at the Daniels faculty. Before I get into the many thank yous, all of you will be invited to a reception upstairs catered by Powwow Cafe. So you're welcome to join us for a bit of food and drink and to enjoy each other's company. So that'll be a little appeasement for the many thank yous that I have lined up next. So I want to thank all of our incredible speakers, Susan, Matthew, Q, and Shannon for their presentations. Your work is so important. We're very grateful for you sharing it with us today. Thank you to James for carefully and eloquently moderating this event. We would be remiss to not thank the small army of people that put together tonight's event. Everyone had a role to play in its success. A big thank you to Alam Hassan for conceiving of the events, which so serendipitously matched with what we were already planning. To Robert Kerr for being open to working with us collaboratively with us, to Laura Farrow, Adam Moffat, Stephen Kasim, and the entire Doors Open Toronto team. I would like to acknowledge and thank our ASL interpreters, David Kalenda and Sharon Hopner, and live captioner Marlene Finnegan. Thank you to the Daniels Outreach team for working on Doors Open Toronto this year, Hamid Nadi, Aidan Cowling, Clara James, Dorothea Kiss, Audrey Janital, and the many student helpers. To Michelle Ng, thank you for your beautiful land acknowledgement. To Elder Wabagoon for her beautiful opening, and to Pat Tobin and Madeline Zito from Great Golf. But most importantly, thanks to all of you for coming today and for your attention, your curiosity, and your inquiries. We encourage you to keep being curious and welcome to join us this weekend at Doors Open, where we have a lot of family-friendly free programming. I also want to share with you in closing a big vision we have for the Daniels Mural Project. As Q had mentioned, the project's not done. The 215 children whose unmarked graves were discovered at a former residential schools are represented through red circles. We're working with an Indigenous educator, Lena Recollet, to create an educator's guide that will provide teachers with lessons from the mural to share in classrooms this fall. The lessons will culminate in the Red Circle honoring activity, where youth are invited to make their own red circle with an image representing resilience, write the meaning of their art on the back of the circle, or write an affirmation of resilience or words of love to the Indigenous children of the unmarked graves being recovered. We hope that Orange Shirt Day, which is September 30th, more than 10,000 red circles will go up across the country to mark the more than 10,000 graves that have been discovered. We hope the whole community, including all of you, could take a moment and create your own red circle and reflect upon the past to find our own path to truth and reconciliation. We'll share the details with you more in the coming weeks, and we thank you for listening. And on behalf of the Daniels faculty and Doors Open Toronto, have a great night, and we'll be going upstairs immediately after, okay? So you'll have some ushers guide you upstairs. Thanks, everyone.